I'd like to read a poem, if I may.
Sure.
And this is, I guess, from your.
I can't even stop you without violating quarantine. So
you have to break my isolation to come in here. So this is in the Sun, this magazine, which we subscribe to, which I like a lot, from the October 2021 issue. And I'll just read this without comment first, and then I'll comment afterwards. By a woman named Alison Luterman. It's called "A Few Days After My First Vaccine." Walking by and this is the October 2021 issue, so we know what vaccine she's referring to. A few days after my first vaccine. Walking by the lake, I lose an earring and don't even notice it at first, overwhelmed as I am by the strangeness of everything. Blocks later, my hand reaches up to feel that slight absence in one ear. So then I have to retrace my steps, as they say to do, past the guy jogging with his mask pulled down and the hijab-wearing, stroller-pushing young mother in stylish jeans, and the homeless man emerging from his tent on the banks of our urban oasis, bearing a boombox on one shoulder. And that's where I spot it, lying on the sidewalk, miraculously untrampled, small, precious found thing, a turquoise oval encircled with rows of beads, given to me with love by someone I haven't hugged in more than a year. Tiny rescue from the sea of loss, just as we seem to have found a raft to grab onto in the wake of a shipwreck so vast we cannot yet imagine the end of it. I was struck by this poem. I've read it several times now, because I think it finally gave me some insight that I've been looking for into the mindset of the people who really believed, and many of whom still believe, that the vaccines are going to be our salvation. This tells us that, the last lines about the earring, but we know what she's talking about. Tiny rescue from the sea of loss, just as we seem to have found a raft to grab onto in the wake of a shipwreck so vast we cannot yet imagine the end of it. The vaccines are a raft. The vaccines have been promoted by these same health officials who have had incoherent after incoherent, damaging after damaging recommendation and mandate in many cases that come down on us with regard to this thing. And they are the ones who successfully sold to many, many people the idea that there is one and only one solution for you. It will be the vaccine. That is the only thing that will help you. These are the same people who will not talk about repurposed drugs. They will not talk about vitamin D. They will not talk about the value and virtue and wisdom and health of moving your body and losing weight and eating real food. They will not talk about any of those things. The only thing they talk about is the vaccine. And so in a honestly pretty hippie, crunchy, liberal, dippy magazine like The Sun, which I love, we have a poem that ends just as we seem to have found a raft to grab onto. No, these vaccines aren't that. They're not that. And every passing week assures us that that's not the case. So how do we talk to the people who still think that they're the raft, and that those of us who didn't grab onto the raft are not actually sinking them?
So I'm struck frequently. You mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that the first tripwire we hit was the lab leak. I don't actually feel that it was a tripwire because, I think of them actually as third rails. And that one, we touched it. And I think people were already clear enough that something about the story of the origin of this virus was phony enough that we didn't suffer the same fate as discussing early treatment.
I think you're misremembering how hard it was for the first year, actually.
That may be. Let's put it aside, though. Nonetheless, being steeped in the question of lab leak and then finding ourselves with an appalling, cartoonish, upside-down public health response being managed by who? Managed by the dude who circumvented the law in order to make gain-of-function research that he wanted done move to China so that the Congress's ability to prevent gain-of-function research from being done explicitly because it could cause a very serious pandemic He wanted to override that. So we are being fed. I mean, if that was ineptitude, fine. But the point is that not sufficient ineptitude that this person couldn't possibly be put in charge of dealing with the pandemic, right? And having failed to deal with the pandemic, couldn't possibly be left in charge. And certainly that same person who overrode the ban on gain-of-function research and offshored it to China, that guy couldn't possibly be the one to decide whether we should just double down on the same vaccines in light of Omicron or maybe switch gears. Why is that same guy in charge of the question? Right? That should be on everybody's mind. This is a path.
Charge, right? Not just of the question with regard to the vaccines, but the only two possible drugs that have been considered, which turn out to be both ineffective and toxic, are the ones that are produced by the profit-making entities as well.
Right. And I would just add to that list of amazing anomalies. You know, how many times were we shouted out about the supposed failure of randomized controlled trials as evidence for drugs that in a clinical setting clearly work. But, you know, we have a randomized controlled trial that says fluvoxamine works extremely well. And it's not like that has been rushed to the forefront of the standard of care. So we have an incoherence. Right? We had to do everything to rush these vaccines to market in a single year. And it is an impressive feat to have done it, irrespective of whether or not the vaccines are something that should be contemplated by people. But nonetheless, we were in this incredible rush to get a vaccine out the door. And now it's been a year and we're stuck with the same vaccine. It hasn't even been updated with respect to antigen, right? We were in such a rush. We're now rushing with the molnupiravir, right? But we have a drug that has passed randomized controlled trial, appears to have a very good effect, and there doesn't seem to be any movement on it at all. What is this?
This is all true, but I think we're talking at cross purposes. And I think maybe you and I are just in different places with regard to what is gripping us most at the moment about the utter absurdity of the moment that we're living in. And I, for months now, really have been trying to figure out what's in the heads of the people who are going along with this and helping make these policies, these insane policies, stick and persist. And this poem, I feel like, gave me some insight. And what I don't know is, you know, how to reach such people. You know, you and I have both talked about things that we do, you know, eavesdropping when we're out, not that that's going to happen for a few days here, but, or, you know, just raising anything that sounds like non-narrative, not on narrative doubts in casual interchanges, and being not at this point surprised by the vast majority of people who immediately grasp onto that and go like, oh, yes, I don't see it the way I'm being told I see it, right? And I mean, I had an interchange this week with a woman who I do know in passing, but who I thought was totally on board, who just got boosted recently and is done. She is done. The side effects she's experiencing, the fear now of what she has done to herself, and the fights that she is having with family and friends over her refusal to engage in the cognitive dissonance anymore. It's extraordinary. This reflects what a lot of people are going through, but how to be open and honest and honorable enough to reach more, to reach the people who would write a poem that seems so earnest and has so misplaced its faith in that raft. These vaccines are no raft.
Well, but I think in some sense it's the same thing, right? I'm frequently asked to isolate the issues from each other. All right, let's leave aside the issue of repurposed drugs. Let's talk about the vaccines. And the answer is you can't actually separate those, because the whole argument in favor of taking a vaccine this novel and applying it so broadly is that we didn't have a choice. And to the extent that we did have a choice, and that choice was driven off the map first in order to make the argument that, well, okay, it's novel, but we don't really have a choice. The point is, those are two sides of the same coin. And so the sense that the person who sees the vaccines as the raft is conveying is a sense that was cultivated for them. It's not a natural conclusion, right? We would be somewhere very different if doctors had been allowed to do their thing, which some great doctors did, right? Doctors are supposed to be scientists. When they have an emergent condition, they are supposed to say, well, here are the symptoms, and this is what I think it implies about what's taking place inside of this person. And here are some compounds that have this and that effect, and I'm going to try them. And they are supposed to learn, and then they are supposed to talk to each other. And that process is supposed to make doctors better and better at treating the disease. And what we did instead was we had some top-down bureaucratic thing telling doctors what they were allowed to think, what they were allowed to try, what they were allowed to discuss. It has literally removed licenses. It has fired people who concluded things that were contrary to the public health authority. And it has created an environment in which basically you have two choices. You either embrace the advice of a public health authority that is clearly mad, or you're on your own. And neither of those are good choices. But it is time that we, the public, I mean, in some sense, aren't we stuck? When you and I were kids, the idea of entheogens, right? These were very controversial. And the idea that a person might actually have the right to ingest a mushroom that would alter the way they saw the world, that was not understood to be a right by most people. And some of us said, well, what is the basis on which a government tells you you can't alter your thinking by eating a mushroom that does not appear to be toxic, right? Why does the government get to do that? And of course, in 2020, 2021, 2022, we're waking up to the fact that maybe the government doesn't have that right. And in fact, there are therapeutic benefits to these things. But why is this situation any different, right? You've got a variant out there. It is not safe, but you are being offered other alternatives that aren't safe. You're being offered vaccines that aren't safe, and you're being offered the gamble that you will face future variants that are even much less safe. Do you not have a right to decide for yourself that actually, you know what? Given everything I know about this disease and given what I know about the hazard of Omicron, that I'm better off contracting it. And if you're really in good shape, you can actually manage the disease with many of the tools that the renegade doctors have discovered works, right? Are you not entitled to do that in consultation with your doctor? And if not, why not?